Deputy Leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Floyd Shivambu, is here. He's standing with my colleague Xolani Mbandra, and he's standing now on the steps to Parliament. Let's just cross there and let Xolani speak to Floyd Shivambu. Xolani, I imagine you've got plenty of questions for the Deputy Leader of the EFF.
Good afternoon. Stephen, that is correct. It's actually, a lot of questions for the Deputy Leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters. We know how militant they have been. Particularly, we saw last year when, Minister Pravin Gordhan at the time tried to actually provide, some background to the budget vote. They did not want him to prevent his particular budget vote. So it's something that is quite interesting that to speak to them and find out what is on their wish list. But Mr. Shivambu, thank you very much for joining us. One of the big questions that we've seen in the past week is the EFF saying that the idea of a sovereign wealth fund is an EFF idea. Do you still maintain that, as we might hear some details that have to do with a sovereign wealth fund being created here for South Africa?
No, look, we are the only political party that has ever come with a substantial policy position on the creation of a sovereign wealth fund. That is in our founding manifesto as the EFF, and it is based on a position that the state should own and control its natural resources, particularly the minerals. And that is how sovereign wealth funds are created in Norway, in China, in Dubai, in other countries in the Emirates district. So that is our proposal in terms of how it is. And it looks like the president, when he spoke in Sona, he misconstrued what essentially we meant by a sovereign wealth fund. He just wanted to ride with the wave in terms of creation of a wealth fund without control and ownership of the strategic resources. So that is one of the issues that we'll get to listen to in terms of what comes out today and whatever. Yeah.
One of the other issues that was actually mentioned, as we are expecting to hear in a couple of hours, is the idea of a state bank. Does the EFF, buy into that idea, and if so, in what form should it be created?
Look, we are also the first ones to propose the idea of a state bank. We actually even tabled the private members' bill to amend the Banks Act last year, and opportunistically National Treasury introduced something called the Financial Matters Amendment Act in the space of the Banks Amendment Act, because we were saying that the Banks Act should be amended to permit for the state to own banks, because under the previous legislation, the state was not allowed to own banks. And in the practical ways of what should happen, we are saying that let us utilize the African Bank as the nucleus of the state-owned bank. Currently, the African Bank is owned 50% by the South African Reserve Bank, 25% by the PIC, and 25% by a consortium that is composed of all other banks, the 4 or 5 private banks in South Africa. So we're saying that that state should take all those assets and then convert that into a state-owned bank, and that all the banking and financial matters of the state should be conducted through that particular bank. In terms of what happens, it will become one of the biggest banks in South Africa, and that is the only proper and correct approach that must be taken by the sovereign government.
Mr. Shivambu, one other thing is if the EFF was presenting this budget, itself this afternoon, what actually would you focus on outside of the two issues that we've spoken about today?
Look, we have got multiple crises in South Africa. One is the crisis of unemployment at the highest rates in many years, like almost 40%, like more than 10 million South Africans who are looking for jobs not have jobs. And we've got another crisis of stagnant growth in terms of the economy. The economy is not expanding, and when the economy does not expand, it means that you've got a reduced base to collect revenue. Like you do not have enough money for the state to deliver basic services. You've got a crisis as well of a growing debt which is not manageable in the current context, because Government expends more than 200 billion just paying interest of the debts that it has created for a variety of reasons. And, so, and as a matter of fact, the South African government now, Ramaphosa, Tito Mboweni, and all of them are not trustworthy. You cannot trust them in terms of coming up with solutions. They are failing to stabilize the supply of electricity, which anyone who understands economics would know that if you want to grow an economy, you need a stable electricity supply. They cannot deal with all of those issues. But if we were to present a budget, we're going to deal fundamentally with all those issues of how do we respond to the crisis of unemployment. And we had said in the SONA debate that part of the mechanisms is to utilize state procurement. So more than 800 billion rands is expended by the state every year, buying different goods and services. And we can utilize that for localization and therefore economic growth activity that grows and then jobs. But currently there is no clear framework because the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act does not prescribe that the goods and services that are bought by the state must be locally bought. And when we speak about services, we speak broadly even about professional services. So if you check where the state procures its auditing and even legal services or accounting services, it's from multinational companies. When you can begin to empower local companies to perform those functions in a way that will empower a lot of our people here. So a lot of money which government expends ends up leaving the country and it doesn't ignite any economic activity that is meaningful here in our country. It's one of the things that has to be dealt with differently, but also a clear plan in terms of how to stabilize energy supply in South Africa. The government doesn't have a clear plan. We're going to talk to the detail of how do we deal with that and how do we then deal with the issue of stagnant growth and also the issue of the electricity supply in the manner that it's supposed to be. So that is the issues that we're going to be speaking to much more concretely as the EFF, and to say that let us utilize state power to ignite economic activity and growth.
Before I let you go, are you feeling confident that the budget speech this afternoon will make any dent or instill any confidence in the people on the state about the direction where it's going?
I think anyone who will believe what Tito Mboweni says will be a fool, really. He'll just acknowledge the crisis, but there's no believable solution that is going to come from him. He has never come out with anything wise in terms of what he says. He has got an economic recovery strategy which is basically a backward neoliberal strategy which will just deepen the crisis in South Africa. So anyone who believes Tito Mboweni will just be being foolish. So anyone who thinks that there's going to be a solution out of the budget vote today is misled. There will never be any solution from Tito Mboweni.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shivambu. Stephen, well, you heard it from the deputy leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters saying that that's how they would actually, change and, the economy of the country by actually making sure that they use the state's buying power to actually make sure they drive that particular spending when it comes to being spent on, black companies. And actually also they believe that would actually also improve some of the issues that have to do with unemployment. You heard it from him, but at the same time, they are not confident that there is anything that's going to come from Finance Minister Tito Mboweni's speech later on.